I'm really glad to be here. I was struck last time when I was with y'all how much I enjoyed being with y'all. And it kind of dawned on me, I went, wait, it's because these are kind of your people. Like, I go all over the country and do conferences, but, I mean, Birmingham's kind of like, Birmingham people are like Jackson people who are cool enough to not live in Jackson, okay? So, so it's kind of, there's a lot of resonance there. I just felt really feel at home with y'all, so I'm glad to be back. Congratulations to you for coming to a parenting conference, for spending your Friday night and your Saturday morning, I want to be, in my comfies watching diners, drive-ins, and dives at this time of the week, but you're here for your kids. I know that they appreciate it. I had a couple approach me after a conference once, and they said, we were walking out the door, and our teenage daughter says, oh my gosh, where are y'all going? And we said, we're going to a parenting conference. And she said, good. All right, so I'm sure that they appreciate your doing this as well, all right? I am a clinical psychologist. I do what you would think I do. I have a couch, and I do therapy, and mostly I do therapy with adults, like depression, anxiety, whatnot. I do a good bit of marriage work. Mostly what I do regarding kids now is parent consultation. I used to do some child therapy, but I found that me learning what the child needed and teaching the parents to be sort of my treatment team, me coaching them, ended up helping the kids get better quicker and easier. And so therein lies the validity of a parenting conference. To the degree that you as a parent can kind of tune into where your kids are and where they need to be growing, you'll have a lot more power than some, shrink for 50 minutes an hour, right? So I want to teach you that. Norm and I have been married 36 years. We are now empty nesters, which I can't recommend highly enough. We have 3 kids. They are 32, 30, and 27, all of whom have jobs and none of whom live at home, which is my cred for speaking on parenting, okay? 2 of them are married. I have 1 grandson who's 18 months old. In fact, what I would like to do this weekend is I just have, 600-800 slides of him, and we're going to go through them. And if you have any questions about what's he doing there, I'd be glad to answer, Anyway, my kids always thought it was hysterical that their father was considered a parenting expert. I mean, can you imagine being a child and your dad is considered a parenting expert? Though, a parenting expert is actually just somebody who's gotten too old to remember how hard it really is. Anyway, I asked them on a couple of occasions, would you like to come to a parenting conference, And they're like, no, we'd, ruin your ministry. Tell me about y'all. How many of y'all have kids 12 and over? Good. How about 5 to 12? All right. And 5 and below. All right. That's always the biggest group is the 5 and below. All right. So there's different age ranges here. All right. Notice. Now, it's very important to me to speak to each one of you as we go along this weekend. I'm going to be giving you a lot of principles, and I'm going to be giving you a lot of examples. But the rules are kind of different depending on which one of these age ranges you're in. I talk about 3 different age ranges in parenting, and you'll hear me talk about these all weekend because the rules are kind of different for each one. By the way, the handout is, I'm going to be giving you a ton of material, and that's just kind of an outline for it, just so you have it all written down. Take notes. Don't try to follow it, though. I'm not that systematic, like that I would actually follow my own notes. Anyway, I like to name 3 eras of parenting. Attending, which is 0 to 5, parenting, 5 to 12, and de-parenting, which is 12 and beyond. And then empty nester, which I call MLK parenting, free at last, free at last. Anyway, and we have sort of different jobs in each one of these areas, and what we're trying to accomplish in each one of these age groups, what we're trying to accomplish and what you can accomplish are kind of different. So I want to touch on each one. For instance, those of you who are 0 to 4 or 5, the attending phase, you're not thinking a lot about teaching them about forgiveness and money management, right? You're trying to just sort of keep them fed and safe and keep them from gnawing on the power couplings, right? But parents of littles can often feel really frustrated and feel like they're doing something wrong because there's this constancy. They're still throwing tantrums. We're doing the best they can. and they're still throwing food on the floor. And I hear them say to me things like, Doc, are we doing something wrong? I mean, our life is this sort of chase them across the Walmart parking lot existence. We must be messing it up. Well, one of the things we'll talk about is it is that constant, There is that difficulty of their incessantness. That's what makes the little ages hard. And they're not really learning the principles of parenting yet. We'll get to that. But we got to recognize, for you guys, I talked to a mom not long ago, and I said, what is it that you would want? She has a 3-year-old. What is it you would want from a parenting conference? And she said, hope. I said, about what? She said that it's going to change. That one day we won't have a meltdown every time we leave a play date. Can you give me any hope that they'll actually grow to that? Yes, I can. They will become more manageable. All right, so when you struggle like that, attenders, it's not that you're doing it wrong. That's normal, and we'll talk about how to handle that, all right? My daughter, Callie, my oldest, is 32. She's a therapist, which is interesting. I can't tell sometimes whether it's apple doesn't fall far from the tree or karma's a bitch. I'm not sure which one it is, but she's a therapist. But she told me the other day, she said, a 2-year-old can accomplish more in the 1 minute you turn your back than most adults can accomplish in an entire day. All right, so you attenders, we feel your pain. Next stage is parenting, and this is where, by 5 years old or so, they're going to start being able to actually internalize this stuff we're teaching them with parenting, and we're going to get a lot more involved in helping them learn the principles of self-management. This is where we're, no dessert before supper and helping them with their homework and putting them in timeout. And we've moved from survival to them actually learning. Things are looking up by the parenting age. De-parenting with teens, that's where your goal and their goal is to get rid of them, all right? To sort of separate yourself, put yourself out of a job, and all the rules change again, all right? So there's kind of different rules for each of these, and we've got to address all of them this weekend, all right? So 3 stages. Now, I've got 3 goals this weekend, and most particularly tonight. Number 1. One thing I never particularly liked too much about going to a parenting conference or reading a parenting book was that when I went to this parenting conference, I always sort of left feeling the way I would feel when I'd go to visit my financial advisor. And he's like, dude, all you need to be doing is putting aside another $2,000 a month and y'all are going to be fine. And I'm like, great. That's lots of help, man. Thank you. And you go to this parenting conference and you leave with 5 bullet points for how you're screwing up your kids, and you go, great, So goal 1 is I don't want you coming out of this conference feeling more burdened. We live in an age of what I call anxiety parenting, and parents in our culture live in this kind of fear of messing up their kids. In general, our culture is what I call psychological legalism. In other words, since we've lost a lot of the moral foundation in our culture, we've replaced it with, you can't hurt anybody's feelings. And the new legalism, which is as puritanical as the Puritans ever were, is if you cross this line or offend these people, you're pilloried in the public square, okay? That's the new legalism. Well, applied to parenting, what that means is you'd better do everything right with your parenting or your kids are going to grow up and be dysfunctional and have bad self-esteem and, be codependents, and maybe they'll write a tell-all book about your family called, Family of Fear. And they'll turn it into a Lifetime movie with, Lindsay Wagner playing you, So in the context of everything I'm telling you, I want you to remember this. It's like what Jason was saying. The amount that he thinks about, am I doing this right? How do I approach this? I want to give you the principles, but I want to begin with saying, I'm also going to try to teach you how grace is going to flow over all of this. How there's room for you to not be perfect in this. And the reason that is because parenting is fundamentally not a job or a task or something you're supposed to do right. I'm not here to teach you to do it right. Parenting is fundamentally a relationship, okay? Albeit a relationship with people who are immature and take your money and throw up on you, but a relationship nonetheless, okay? Now, what do you do in a relationship when you screw up? Those of you who are here at the marriage conference, what do you do, hopefully, in your marriage when you screw up? Well, you swing back in. You try to love well, you fail it, and you swing back in and you fix it, you repair it. That's what we do in relationships, all right? I'm not here to teach you to do it better. I'm wanting to teach you how to create something great with your kids. And that means you being fallen, screwed up people together, all right? Research backs this up, by the way. There was a guy, a researcher in the 20th century named D.W. Winnicott. And he was a pediatrician and psychoanalyst, if you can imagine those two together. And he did longitudinal research on parents and their children. He looked at how parents parented, and he lived a long time. He watched as these kids grew up, how they turned out. And what he found out was that the kids who sort of had perfect parents, he goes and finds out what kind of adults they become, and they were weirdos, okay? So he's like, okay, well, that didn't work well, having perfect parents. Let's go back and find out who are the coolest adults. Who are the people who turned out the best? And he found these cool adults. And he traced back, what kind of parents do they have? And he found that the parents were nothing special. They were attentive and engaged with their kids, but they dropped the ball sometimes. They raised their voice, lost their temper. They'd swing back in and repair it. They were available, but distracted sometimes. They were regular people. And what he called them at the end of his research was good enough. They're good enough parents. So goal number 1 is for you to have kind of a vibe that even if your baby is crying, you're good enough. All right? Welcome to the club. In fact, this is going to be our mantra this weekend. And I want you to get your grandmother to needlepoint this and put it over your cupboard, all right? It's this. The only thing better than a perfect parent is a humble parent, all right? A parent who can, screw up in his relationship with his kids and repair it and be good enough. That's going to be all weekend long. That's our backdrop, our foundation. You can't talk about something as vulnerable as parenting without beginning where God does. And that is, there's a grace to cover our multitude of sins, okay? Because we're all going to mess it up. Number 2, I want you to know what you're doing in your parenting. I want you to be informed. Think about it. We don't get any formal training in this incredibly important, sophisticated process of raising other humans, you know? Most of us do it kind of by gut instinct, which means we parent like we were parented. Or we parent the opposite of how we were parented. Or we parent by emotion. Like, oh, I don't want to see him struggle. Let's swing in there and rescue him. And we're doing it out of this sort of reactive style. Sort of not really thinking and aware of what we're doing, but always reactive. And we're always kind of putting out brush fires from what the kids throwing at us. They're sassing me. What do you do? They won't stay in their bed. What do you do? Johnny's drinking again. What do we do? And we're always trying to return their serve if this was a tennis game. But they're the ones bringing the problems. What do we do? Well, I call that a reactive style of parenting. And my vision for you this weekend is for you to leave with more of a proactive style. I want to give you a grid. I want to give you a model. I want to give you a picture of what kids need when they grow up so you can make informed decisions about what you do in your parenting. All right? So my second goal after, hey, you're good enough, is I want you to know what you're doing. I want you to have a grid. And what is that grid? Well, the grid has to do with where they're going. If you want to understand what the goal of parenting is, you got to remember where they're going. The goal of parenting is not have them behave well at grandma's. All right? The goal is simply this. Well, 3 parts to this goal. Part number 1, to equip them, follow me here, to be adults. Okay? The goal is to get rid of them. All right? In other words, the goal isn't for them to say yes, ma'am, and no, sir. The goal is for them to develop the skills and the abilities in their childhood to be able to function well as adults, because that's where they're going, to be able to love well. How do we help them develop that? To be able to forgive, to be able to be strong, to be able to be humble, to be able to submit, to be able to be resilient. The things adults need, all right? We're going to talk about how to help our kids do that. I want you to have a grid for building a toolbox for them to be adults. Second part of that goal is the other thing I want us to create, and these are the same thing as functioning adults. I want you to be working to grow in them a heart that looks like Christ. It's going to look a lot like a heart that functions well in the adult world, but that wouldn't be a surprise, right? Because God made us to function in the world if we look like him. But how can we be working already in their lives? Not just to have them memorize the catechism, but to have them developing the characteristics of someone who's a follower of Christ. Loving, humble, forgiving, strong, steadfast, faithful. How do we do that? They're the same things. And third goal is, how do we keep them from driving you freaking crazy? All right, so 3 goals, all right? In other words, this weekend I plan to answer your specific questions, like how do we get them to clean their room? Not a problem. But more so, I want you to leave a sort of a heads-up awareness of what it is that kids need in order to do adult life and to serve God and to know what you're doing. Now, I want you to have that grid so you can go do parenting well. Also, I'm not going to be able to answer every permutation of every one of your questions. So I want you to have a grid so you can kind of freestyle once you're out there, all right? So tonight, this weekend, we're going to look at this model. And I'm going to work you hard. This is not going to be here's Cox's 3 little tips for parenting better. I want you to leave equipped, okay? I'm going to push you. I want you to understanding your children. I want you to know what's going on with them. You're not going to get this anywhere else. So I'm going to give it to you, all right? So let's ride. I've articulated 7 different abilities that I think sort of capture what kids need to do adulthood. By the way, if you were at the marriage conference, do you remember? I said that I came up with my model for doing marriage by looking at my adult clients and seeing what they could not do. My model for looking at what kids need came from doing therapy with adults and looking at what adults struggle with that gives them depression or marriage troubles or fear asking the boss for a raise. What are the things that adults need to be able to do to function? And I thought, wow, this would be a great model for parenting. Figure out what adults need to function and teach kids that. So that's what we're doing. Now, tonight we're going to look at all 7 of them in overview. Like I said, I'm going to work you tonight. Tomorrow we're going to look at 2 of them in real detail. We're going to do a lot of Q&A to try to put real meat on the bones. But these are my operationalized version of what people need, what your kids need in order to make life work. All right, the first pair. Oh, wait, look. There's just 3 parts of that goal. I'm terrible with this electronic bit. Remember that? Do life as adults, image of God, not drive you crazy? All right, you got that. All right, good. I'm not a techie. All right. We're going to look at them in pairs. The first pair of abilities our kids need fall into the category of what I call love and limits. In a sense, we could do the whole parenting conference and just call it parenting with love and limits. Because all of parenting, a lot of what relationship is about can boil down to that. What does it look like for us to teach them about love? What does it look like for us to set limits on them and their choices? Let's look at that pair first. Number 1, the ability to understand love. We're going to do a whole talk on this one tomorrow because I want you to really have a grid for what it looks like to teach your kids about close relationship. How do we infuse our kids with love? This isn't about who loves you, baby? Who loves you, baby? You know, I've seen these parents who have this kid who's like, the dad's like, who loves Sally? And she's like, Daddy does. Who loves Sally? Daddy does. You know, she's like mimicking back this little thing that she's been told to say. I want to go a little beyond that, all right? It isn't about that who loves your baby thing. It's about something more core, more operating system. God created us as humans. Do you remember in the marriage conference, let you in and keep you in? Yeah. What we were talking about with that is the 2 different sides of what it means to be emotionally connected to another person. God created us to live with the ability to be grounded with an internal sense that I am loved, and I matter, and I am known, and I am seen, and I can share that with you, and I can keep it inside. And that becomes this sort of ultimate battery pack for me that sort of sustains me. Even if you don't like me right now, or even if you're not really approving of me right now. In other words, it's kind of the opposite of insecure. That sense of feeling loved and grounded inside that says, I like my parenting conference. You guys, maybe you won't like it, but I'm kind of okay. Maybe I'll have to modify it because you guys didn't like it, but I feel good about me. Love gives us that kind of background grounding that I'm not looking for love from other people all the time. You know what I'm talking about? That's what I want to infuse in our kids. How do we teach that? Well, number 1, not by coddling. All right? In other words, A lot of people in our culture feel like we teach love by, give your kids anything they want and they'll feel loved, all right? Not by approval and adoration and praise. In other words, look at you, you ride your bike so well. If we tell him he's wonderful all the time, he'll feel loved. No, that becomes kind of an addictive cycle. Like the more of that I get, the more I'm going to want. And you see these kids, at the beach on the boogie board, and all they're doing is like, look, Daddy, look, Daddy, look, Daddy. And you're kind of like, dude, can you not enjoy your boogie board? It's all about Daddy. And we're developing the sense of my approval is your fuel. Don't want that, all right? Approval's cool, but that's not our fuel. So what's love? One of the things we're going to talk about a lot tomorrow is I think that the bottom line of teaching grounding love involves simply this. It ain't rocket surgery. What it feels like to be you, what's important to you, what's hurting for you, matters to me. I think about it. I let it in. I try it on. I don't discount it. And we'll talk tomorrow about what that's going to sound like. It sounds different at different ages. Different ages, in a sense, have different love languages. All right? With a baby, when I respond to that baby's cry and comfort him and help him feel better, what I'm doing there is I'm not just changing a diaper. When we have a baby who's in distress and we move him out of distress, we are laying these lines of code down deep inside of when things are painful, people in your life can make it feel better. Will that be relevant one day as adults? And I'm building this substrate. With toddlers, we're still going to be nurtury like that. We're going to get down and look at that skin knee and kiss it and make it better. And they still need that sort of nurtury, settle down kind of vibe. But with toddlers, we also see them developing a couple of new things. Toddlers, all of a sudden, they're into all the cool things they can do. They have all these new abilities they didn't have when they were infants. And that's like a rush for them. And one of the powerful ways that we love a toddler is by doing two things at once. We're going to talk about how we're really going to celebrate and embrace and mirror and get into all their new little abilities. Look at you. And at the same time, we're going to set limits on those new little abilities because we can't let them toddle out in the street. Right? So love starts to be about these new things they can do and how we embrace them but also set limits on them. And when you do those things, you're not just managing the kids. You're teaching them the core pieces about love, all right? School-age kids, how they feel about things is something we talk about, something we welcome in our family, something we don't discount. We're equipping them to manage life outside the family for the first time. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Teenagers, I'm not even going to open that can of worms. We'll talk about that one tomorrow. How do you show love to a teenager? Right. Come tomorrow. Let me make this simple. Kids have this world. I want you to try it on. What would it be like to be them? Think about it. What would it be like to be them? I mean, what if you live with two people 3 times your height? What if you live with two 18-foot giants? And one of them makes your food and the other one makes you eat it? What would that be like? Mattering and loving and connecting with kids in a simple way can be put like that. I remember my oldest, when she was 13, she got juvenile diabetes. Now, she was 13. Her littlest sister was, I'd say 5 or 6. Bonnie was 5 or 6. So we went into crisis. Kelly's in the hospital. She's diagnosed with diabetes. We're trying to figure out how to do this. So Bonnie and Catherine were staying with my parents. A couple of days go by. We sort of get stable, sort of trying to recover from this. And I go get the kids from the grandparents. And we're in the car, and little Bonnie says, "Is Callie going to die?" And I said, "No, baby, no, And she said, "Well, then why do they call it diabetes?" Okay? I want you to get into their world. I want you to be able to try on what it's like to be them, all right? When we do that, when we are willing to try on kind of what it feels like to be them, that there's a lot going on inside of them, that screams loving to them. One of the other ways I like to say this is we relate to children from 2 places at once. In other words, I am your parent, but we're still just people. Okay? In other words, we're authorities, yeah. We got to be the ones to make the rules, yeah. but I also want to make room to talk to them like people. I want to say, it's time for that little one to go to bed, and they're crying and pitching a fit. And I want to say to them, dude, I totally get it. It is not a fun thing to be the one who gets put to bed and everybody else is still up. I get it that you don't like this. I'm with you. I want to talk to little people like they're people, okay? I used to tell my children, the only difference between you and me is that I was born 20-something years before you, which means I know some stuff you don't know. And God put me in authority over you, which means you got to do what I say, or your lifestyle around here might change. But other than that, I'm a knucklehead like you, and I make mistakes like you, and I'm still learning like you, and I have gifts like you, and we're all kind of in the same boat. Now, what that says is you and me loving each other is a bigger principle in this family than that I'm the parent and you're the child. And this goes against a lot of what Christian parenting books are saying today, and I like that, all right? We're saying us as humans under God is the primary bonding thing for us. Not that I'm the authority and you need to do what I say, all right? Now, we'll unpack all of that a ton tomorrow. I want you to really get a vibe for what it looks like to love and connect emotionally with your kids. That's as important as, we did a whole talk last time on intimacy in marriage. This is going to be intimacy with your kids, okay? Now, before we leave this, though, remember, this is not going to be just another go and do it better now parenting conference, okay? Loving your kids is great, awesome. But what if you're like me? What if you blow your stack with them sometimes? What if you totally drop the ball when you're supposed to be given love and kindness? What if you come in from work and you're exhausted and had a bad day and you see your 4-year-old coming around the corner with the whole gallon of milk, out of the refrigerator, and the top's off, and they start sloshing it. And instead of being that kind, patient parent that I'm sure Dr. Cox would want you to be, and I'm sure that Dr. Cox was, instead you blow your stack, and you yell at them, or you scream, or the two boys are fighting again. Boys, all right? What do we do now to show love, Mr. Psychologist, huh? Okay, well, I'll tell you. Remember, the only thing better than a perfect parent is a humble parent. Okay, so what? So you swing back in. So you blow your stack. So you're not loving and you don't let them matter. Swing back in. And say, man, I totally screwed that up. And I was mean to you. And I hurt you. And I got some real growing to do there. No excuse for me to act that way. Really ask your forgiveness, little 5-year-old. All right? Now look what you've done. You've turned a total screw up with your child into a moment of deep intimacy and deep humility, which is that loving and mattering that we're talking about. God's strength made perfect in weakness. Mischief managed, all right? Because you're a screw up. And your kid wins, and so do you, because you're a screw up, all right? That's the gospel at home. We're going to use your fallenness to draw you closer to your kids. See where we're going? I want to teach you what it looks like to do it well, and then we're going to use your screw-ups to be closer to them. It's a win-win, all right? All right. Love. Number 2, another thing we need, the limit side. We're going to do a whole talk on this one tomorrow, too. The ability to understand consequences. Ability to understand how choices work in the world. This one's about wisdom. This one is about discipline. And we're going to be skimmy here again because we're going to do a whole talk tomorrow. But how do we get good, strong kung fu in our discipline, huh? Well, here's the fundamental question every kid is asking. Why can't I just not do anything I want? Why do I have to do what you say? Huh? And conversely, every parent I talk to is asking me the opposite question, which is, how do I get my child to do what I want? All right, by the way, remember what our goal is? Our goal is adulthood. Our goal is to prepare them to be adults. So, by the way, neither one of these questions are helpful. The question I want my children asking ultimately is, what kind of choices in my life will lead to good things for me, both for me and for other people? That's what God calls wisdom. That's ultimately where we want them to be, all right? And by the way, that will ultimately get them to do what you want. So the question isn't just how do we get them to do what I want? The question is, how do we get them to do what I want ultimately, but how do we teach them to make wise choices? That's where I wanted my kids by college. Because nobody's going to be telling them to make wise choices in college. I don't know, you guys been to college? You seen many wise choices? No, right. In fact, you could pick out the kids whose parents were all up in their grits their whole childhood. They're the ones screaming out the window of the dorm the moment their parents drive out of town, with REO Speedwagon cranked up in the back. This kind of dates me in college, huh? Anyway, what we're going to talk about tomorrow, again, is some people try to address this with coddling. And that is, I'm going to beg and persuade, come on, baby, let's go. Come pick up your toys. All right? But mostly people will ultimately gravitate to some form of control. In other words, we're going to try to force them and control them to do what I want. Now, those of you who have toddlers or teenagers know that this control thing doesn't work very well, right? It would be great if kids did what we said because we said so, right? But this is Earth, all right? Welcome. They're not going to do that, all right? In fact, what usually happens? What usually happens is we see something we want changed and we issue a command. In other words, Billy, stop bugging your brother at the dinner table. Now, what's going to happen next? Well, Billy's going to wait 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and then he's going to what? Bug his brother again, right? He's a red-blooded American boy. How's he going to miss this chance? There's his brother right next to him. Just because you've given a command, why should he do that? Now, what we're going to talk about tomorrow is, this is the little moment that most parents run into, and it's a power struggle, and we'll talk about that. What we'll talk about tomorrow is the next thing to do is to not just intensify your command. Billy, I said, quit bugging your brother, okay? A louder version of an ineffective tool is just more loudly ineffective, right? Right? What we're going to talk about, if you want real power with Billy, is we will say that the only way, secret of the universe, the only way that a child learns to make better choices is by experiencing an event. Okay? We're going to talk about how children are concrete. They're concrete thinkers and they're concrete feelers. And the least powerful tool you have to deal with them is your words. They need an experience. Children only learn to obey through events. In other words, Billy, if you touch your brother again, you're going to time out an event. If you touch your brother again, I'm going to take your plate and keep it until the rest of us have finished eating an event. And then follow through, which of course I know is not a problem for any of y'all. We're actually going to follow through with what we've threatened, all right? We're not nagging. We're not power struggling. We're going to silently get up and take his plate. And you can be nice. In fact, it's better if you're nice. And we'll talk tomorrow about what will begin happening is that Billy will start learning. Operative word here is learning. The ability to obey is a skill and an ability that I develop and learn. It's not some capacity that I have and I'm just refusing to use it because I'm a disobedient child. No, it's a skill we're going to teach them. Okay? Anyway, Billy's going to start learning that this is not between me and Dad anymore. Dad doesn't have a dog in this fight as to whether I bug Billy anymore. He could care less. This is about whether my hiney is going in timeout or not. This is about whether I lose my supper or not. An event, an experience. That's the only place that irresponsible people learn. Know any of those? Okay. By the way, it's exactly correspondent to other irresponsible people. Substance abusers, alcoholics, any addiction, an out-of-control behavior. You can tell them all day long, just think of what this is doing to your family. What changes them? An intervention, treatment, an event. The only way out-of-control parts of us ever learn is by experiencing an event, okay? A lot of times, disobedience in kids is not just because they're little jerks who want to overthrow the government of your home. It's because typically all we're ever dealing with them is our words back and forth. They need an event, okay? Now, attenders, remember we're going to talk to different ages? You attenders, admittedly, your little girls are just beginning to sort of get this principle. I remember when my middle one was potty trained, we told her, when you potty train, when you can use the potty, we're going to go to Toys R Us and buy you your own potty. And so, lo and behold, she succeeded. She's like TTing like a big girl, all right? So we're off to Toys R Us, and somehow I ended up alone with her. I still don't know where Norma and the other kids were. But I'm on the little potty aisle with her, and we pick out a potty, and we get it down. And I would go around the corner to try to find Norma and the other girls, and I come back, and Catherine is like trying it out. You know, she's got her pants all the way down and the box open. She's going to test drive this baby right here, okay? Now, you ask me, Dr. Cox, how do you discipline in that scenario? You can't, all right? In other words, you attenders, you're like rolling your eyes at my Billy example because your kids aren't there yet. With little kids at this age, a lot of what we're doing is more like restraint than discipline, you know? A mom was telling me the other day that her toddler, she walked in and he was toddling toward the electrical outlet with a pair of tweezers. And admittedly, you know, why would he do that? I don't know. I think, you know, well, the electrical outlet looks like a little face, you know, like, you know, I don't know why they made it look like two little guys, you know. So she's like, how do I stop him from doing that? You can't, but you can begin. You can take those tweezers, pop that little hand, no, 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 and you're starting to begin to form that connection. My grandson's 18 months old, and just in the last couple of weeks, I saw cause and effect bloom in his brain. Like he realized this little controller makes that car run. This, and he starts seeing cause and effect. So discipline starts to be something we start to use. But he's very much in the tender phase. He loves to climb up the stairs in our house, big wooden stairs. And you get him down off the stairs and put him down, and he's like back on the stairs like a wind-up toy. So should we learn to discipline him? No, we should get a baby gate, okay? So this is that survival piece of having the littles. Don't let that frustrate you. They will begin to learn, all right? Parenting age. 6-year-old Susie won't get her pajamas on to get ready for bed. And so if you're like our house was, we fussed and fumed. We tried to put the pajamas on her. Y'all done that while they're fighting you? You know, you're trying to, you know. Okay, so she needs an event, right? I want to put her in her pajamas in the bathroom and say, you guys can come out when you're together. Now, that can be in 30 seconds or 30 minutes or 30 years. I don't care. Take your time, all right? Now, I can see your faces. Everybody goes, yeah, but what if, you know, we'll do that tomorrow when we talk about discipline, all right? You're going to help me put meat on the bones. I want you to get the vibe first. We need an experience, not a power struggle, all right? De-parenting age, that teenager who loves to argue with you. Teenagers love to argue. Why? Well, they've all of a sudden developed frontal lobe ability. They have abstract reasoning. What do toddlers like to do when they learn to toddle? They like to toddle, okay? What do teenagers do when they develop abstract reasoning? They like to argue, okay? Well, actually, that's not what you said 2 weeks ago. You know, Your Honor, I would like to call as a witness, you know. All right, don't argue with them. How do you stop them from arguing? You can't. What you can do is not play. What you can do is give an event. The tennis game is over really quick if they hit the tennis ball to you and you don't respond. I'm not going to argue with you anymore. And you can keep coming at me with yeah buts and yeah buts all day long, and I'm going to not really engage you. And I think you've been doing that long enough now. I think if you bring it up again, I'm taking your phone. See, we're going to get us out of the mix and try to put an experience in there, okay? That event. Now, we'll talk tomorrow about how that's going to shift the conflict from you versus them to them versus their choices, which is where kids learn, all right? And which is how adult life works. And which is where they ultimately will learn to do what you say when you ask, okay? Now, good. As I said, those are the two most basic parts of parenting, love and limits. Teaching them about connection and belonging, the beginning parts of discipline. We're going to talk about both of those a ton tomorrow. Before we go any further, I want to just make a brief pause and see if there are any questions. Just on that. Loving, belonging, connection, mattering, and limit setting. Stretch your brains a little bit instead of just listening. ma'am. Should we use this? Well, they want the recording.
So in saying that, teaching children that you matter to me, would you agree that there are different ways to communicate that to children? Like, or do you subscribe to the 5 love languages? Like, some children receive you matter to me through quality time. Some do it through gifts. You know, for those of us who have several children in the house, I feel like love looks very different to different children.
Beautiful, yes. Can you say more about that?
Oh.
Tell us more about that. No, you guys who've been in my conferences before know that I do not sit in the seat of Moses. I believe in the body of Christ. You just talked about a facet of this I don't address. I love it.
Okay.
Say more.
So we have 4 children, and we have they all receive and give love in very different ways. We have one that very much wants your attention. She's our middle child, and just having time alone means the world to her. Our 5-year-old loves giving gifts and loves receiving things like a flower. Our oldest, we're not sure. He just demands a whole lot. And so it feels unequal in a lot of ways with our children, because I feel like they're demanding different things of us, and we're giving, doing a date with this one is more of a priority, whereas taking this one to the toy store and getting her something. And so it can seem kind of unfair, but also exhausting to try to keep up with that.
Well, I love your thinking on it. Let me reflect on a couple ideas about it. One of the things that I would want to play with that is part of mattering is what it looks like for me to receive. In other words, you're saying different kids receive and delight in receiving different things. All right, and yet there was a little vibe in what you said of different ones are kind of demanding different things. There's a little bit of expectation in there. I think it's beautiful when we can give to our kids in terms of specifics like time or a gift or love language kind of stuff. One of the things I want to do with mattering at the real depth love level is I also want to look at how do I communicate to them that you matter to me. There's not going to be a gift. We're not going to do anything together today. I'm exhausted. How do I still convey that mattering, even in the midst of disappointment, even in the midst of them not receiving? That would be a place I would counterbalance yin and yang. What you're saying is that's a beautiful conceptualization of how to give to them. I want mattering to also reach beyond that for them to say, I didn't get that thing that I wish I got with you or from you, but I still know I matter to you. And that's a lot more where my focus is, though I like that. So what would that look like? One of the things we'll talk about later tonight. What does it look like to help our children come to grips with disappointment? Or how do we make them still feel loved in the midst of not getting what they want? How do we deal with disappointment in a way where they still feel grounded and whole? We'll talk about that, and I think that'll sort of wrap into some of what you're saying. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. No, you don't stand up.
Okay.
You need to use the mic, though.
I mean, I probably just need to be in private therapy with you, but we have twins that are about to be 3, and they're like borderline criminals, and they're like running our house.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
They're in charge of everything. We have an older
criminals.
child, and I'm not even like here at a conference for her. So the twins, like we're talking about raising your voice, and I yell at them a lot. It's not even out of anger. They won't, I can't get their attention. They won't listen to me. I thought I was anti-spanking, and then we have to start spanking. And so now they're spanking each other and talking about how many times, we put a spoon. He went out of town all week, and he put a spoon outside their room, to be frightening. And they just came out of the room, and they were like, I got spanked by this spoon. You guys, I mean, they think it's funny. It's like being on a play date with the worst. Just competing. And I just told him it's like being on a play date with like the other child who's the worst possible influence on your child, but like they're together like all the time.
Like,
and I don't know what to do.
The sibling is like the child you wouldn't let your child play with. But now
Exactly.
You'll never go over to her house
But I mean,
again.
they love each other. They're very, very loving and sweet, but like terrible. And I don't know what to do. Like, how do I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying about loving and limits, and is there a caveat for like multiple? Do they need to be
none of
away
stuff
from each
works
other? Like,
with twins. I meant to say that. And triplets, give it up. You know, no, I'm
like
teasing.
how do I? Yeah, I mean, I'm honestly like, how do I? Yeah, just fix me. I guess that's my question.
Well, let me try to say something. One of the reasons I have the category of attending is because some of what you're saying is and 2 kids is not twice as bad. It's exponential. It's like cubed or squared, or it's a lot harder. So attending in itself is just incredibly helpless. Like the mother who said, "Give me hope." In other words, there's this constant stuff. Now, square that with twins, and it's a zillion times harder. So if your question is, how do I make that easy? I can't make that easy. What I can say is that, number one, it would be interesting to sit and try to fine-tune some of your thinking on discipline, because they are old enough to start. I was talking to the mother of a 3-year-old the other day. I'll tell you about her in a little bit. Who it's like, 3-year-old won't respond, and she's like, "Well, we're going to have treats later, and we're not going to give you a treat." And he's starting to really get that. All right, so there's traction for that age by 3. Every day that goes by, it's going to get better. But if what you're asking is there any way to where they can get under control right now? Not in this season. It will just be pull your hair out. Yeah. But I want you to know that it's sort of like if you're driving through the desert. The desert's hot, and it's a long way, but California's on the other side. It's going to be better. It's going to happen. This is a season. But I wish we could talk in more detail about the dynamics of the screaming or the dynamics of the spanking, or we ought to be able to fine-tune that some. But do you have a specific question buried in there somewhere? Right.
Like, how do I show them with a calmer, I can't get their attention. It's like
Do you ever use timeout?
yes. I mean, that if one goes to timeout, then the other one like wants to go. And she's like, "Put me in timeout."
You put them in separate timeouts?
They compete. So
For being in timeout?
for everything.
Interesting. Huh. Let me think on that one. Amelia. All right. I'm going to remember you, Amelia. All right, let's work on this some more. Yeah. Where are you? God, y'all are hammering me. Y'all are hammering me. What did you say? 3 years old? What?
We have twins that are about to turn 3 as
Yeah?
well, and we need a better
We need a
answer.
support
Do y'all
group.
have? Yeah, I don't know if I have one.
We do
Okay.
have a
Do
question.
y'all have a support group that you're both a part of?
We need to start one.
I think she does have a real question.
I do have a real question. I find myself I find myself with twins, screaming to get attention, like
Right.
the twin-to-twin escalation syndrome. They're not arguing frequently, like they're just talking louder than me, and it goes up and up and up until eventually it's this not so much a snap, it's just hey, like to get attention. Then it just gets louder and louder, and so eventually, like after 5 minutes,
That's similar to
Yeah.
Amelia's story.
right. What is the balance between, or is there a balance? I guess is my question, between screaming to get your attention to hey, focus and let's talk about this, versus not screaming as a parent to just and letting them roll, like just keep going what they're doing.
Yeah, right. Like I said a minute ago, I don't think I know the answer to the twins question yet. I'll keep working on it this weekend.
Please do.
Yeah, right.
Please do.
Right. Anybody else got twins? open to any ideas that we could help them with. Body of Christ, friends, help me out. All right, let's look at another dynamic duo. We're going to look at two more, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and look at the rest. The next pair is submission and strength. In other words, our kids need to be able to understand what it means to submit and what it means to be strong at the same time. Love and limits, strength and submission. The ability to submit. Let's look at that one. In other words, how do we make sense of helping our kids get off the throne in their lives? In other words, how do we help them learn to bend the knee? You can say it kind of like this. Part of our job with parenting kids is to help them learn to grow up, right? Well, part of our job is to help them learn to grow down and to learn that they don't run things and to learn that they are not the center of the universe and they're not special snowflakes, okay? That we're the parents and they need to respect that. There's a sense in which, the Bible tells us that we're all born and we hold a board meeting and we essentially elect ourselves chairman, right? That's our human nature. Like, have you ever met a patient infant? Like, Mom, I got dirty britches, but you've done so much for me today. Put your feet up. You deserve a break. That doesn't happen. There's a sense in which, as parents, our children are not willing participants in this process, They don't want what we're selling. It's not like they came to our house and knocked on the door and said, hey, I'm this sort of self-centered, entitled person, and I'm looking for somebody basically to help me become a humble, wise adult. Are you interested in, being my sponsor? They did not do that. They don't want this. So we have to be, as children, and sometimes as adults, we have to learn to submit. We have to be taught to submit. Now notice I say teach, okay? A lot of authoritarian types act like submission is just this thing we ought to require and expect out of children. Like there's this 4-year-old walking around with this incredibly sophisticated emotional ability to bend the knee, and by golly, they just won't, And we say things like, well, when I was a kid, all my parents had to do was say boo, and I jumped, which is why we're all in therapy, right? But hear me here. Submission is not something to just require. It is an internal heart capacity that we have to teach. This is one of the reasons I want you to be careful with the because I said so types, like John Roseman or Ted Tripp or, the shepherding heart guy. Like, be careful about that, all right? A child having the ability that we've helped them cultivate to do what we say when we say so is the end result of a lot of growing and learning, not just something we begin with, a baseline to require, okay? Besides, to most kids, do this because I said so feels to all the world, and I've had them tell me this, feels all the world like because I feel like it, or because I'm big and you're small, or because I win and you lose, okay? And besides, God never says because I said so. God says, do this that you may live. Do this that it will go well with you. He talks about the consequences and the choices and the events, like we just said, okay? So how do we teach submission? It's something to teach. Here's a little quickie model for it that I like. Even though this is a very nuanced and complex ability, here's a model. The term I like is we need to lovingly disappoint them. And that means we do two things at once. Number one, we do need to disappoint them, which means for somebody to submit, we do need to alpha them, okay? Our culture in a lot of ways is full of parents who are sort of very child-centered, We're kind of like, what is thy bidding, my master? Norm and I joke that one mistake we made in our parenting was we tried to teach servanthood by modeling it. Thinking they would go, wow, Mom and Dad are really great servants. I want to be like that. No, instead they were like, garçon, I like having servants. This is awesome. Anyway, so step one is we do have to stand our ground and push them to recognize that they don't run things. Kids will basically treat you like a box of cookies. To the degree that you aren't structured and limit setting, they're going to eat the whole box. They'll eat you up. They'll never stop. Oh, I've had enough. You've given me plenty. All right? Kids are all born with the disease I call entitlement. All right? kind of I deserve everything. Those of you with teenagers, I saw those hands. You know that teenagers actually have a word for it. Not really sure how you spell it, but it goes like this. All right, so you can tell me how to spell that. So only cure for entitlement starts with disappointing. That means attenders, that child is throwing that toy, the toy goes away. They're throwing the toy at you, we put them in timeout. Whit was sitting in his high chair the other day with a little plate of chicken nuggets and french fries, and he's looking at me, and he's pulling out his french fries, and he's looking at me, and he's dropping them. And I said, Whit, no. Pulls out another one, drops it. Right? Now, one thing they've invented since I was a parent is a tray within a tray. You can take the top tray off. How cool is that? I know you guys know about it. Right? In my day, you couldn't do that. You had to take the whole tray off. It was terrible. Anyway, I took his tray off, and he stopped. Put it back. He quit throwing his junk. We need to alpha them. We set the limit, okay? We got to disappoint. That's the first part. Bonnie was our youngest. You'll hear some Bonnie stories. She was the last one home. I like to cook. And I have a cappuccino maker. And one Saturday morning, I was making cappuccino. Shh, like that. So anyway, Bonnie's up in her bed upstairs, and I hear her go, Daddy? I'm like, yeah. And she goes, will you make me a cappuccino? I'm like, okay. 1 beat, 2 beat. And bring it to me in my bed. I went to the bottom of the stairs, and I yelled up. I said, just so I can look your husband in the eye one day, no, I will not bring you a cappuccino in your bed. I now know her husband, and I'm glad I did that, okay? So, point 1, we got to disappoint them. Point 2 is if we want to change their hearts. All right, we're going to shift gears here a second. Submission is about the heart. It's not that hard to make a child do what you want, especially when they're little. It's not hard to make them bend the knee before you. You're bigger than them. How do you change their heart? How do you help them develop a heart of submission? Well, think about it like this. Why is submitting hard? All of us submit in some category. Why is it hard? Well, I think it's because submission is potentially humiliating. In other words, you win and I lose, right? That's why it's hard. That's why your teenager would rather die than obey you. Because submitting means you win and I lose. So what heals the humiliation of bending the knee? I think if you want your child to heart learn, what heals that humiliation is that we, their parents, have to submit to. We have to bend the knee to authority too, and we get it. In other words, we lose sometimes too. In other words, we alpha but with empathy. We alpha but lovingly because we get it that it's hard. All right? Think about it. You're under authority too. You have to bend the knee too. You don't get a say in a lot of things. The big build is happening here. I bet you don't like it. They didn't ask you. You now have to detour on the freeway. Don't you hate that? It's going to freeze in 2 days and kill every one of those beautiful plants you see outside. Did anybody consult you? That bugs me. I don't want the new little spring to get smushed by this cold weather. I don't get a say-so in that. Your boss tells you to come in, you have to come in. Cop tells you to pull over, you have to pull over. Pay your taxes, whatever. Don't you hate that? You have to bend the knee too. I want to bring that to our kids. That empathy takes the sting of humiliation out of submission so kids can do it. Okay? Now with littles, all that may mean is you're dragging them out of the toy section at Walmart and they're kicking their legs and you go, I get it, I understand, I know you don't want to have to leave the toy section. Just those words start to create a connection. With parenting age or de-parenting age, I remember one of mine told me once, it was in the 90s. When did Clinton get elected the first time? 92. It was 1992. Or maybe 93, because it was tax season. And one of my children said, that's not fair. You just get to make up rules and we have to follow them. And part of me wanted to go, it can learn. All right? But I stopped, and I had been talking to my accountant that day, and I found out because Clinton was elected, I was going to pay a ton more tax this year. And I didn't even vote for this guy. All right? And I slowed it down and I backed it up and I thought about this and I said, you know what? You're right. That stinks. Like somebody else gets to make the rules and you just have to follow them. That hurts. That feels terrible. Now, you're still grounded, but I get it. All right? We bring both of those pieces to them. All right? Basic psychological spiritual law. This is a freebie. All right? Not included in the conference, but a freebie. The only way to change an inclination of the heart, the only way to change a feeling or a heart issue is for it to be known and understood in the context of love and limits. Let me say that again. The only way to make a heart grow, the only way to heal sinfulness or brokenness or fallenness in your child's heart is for that part of their heart to be seen and known in the context of love and limits. All right? I'm talking parenting age through de-parenting age. The tenders, they're not going to get it yet. But if we want to help their hearts grow, we welcome them with limits. What that sounds like is this. Callie told me once, when she was school age, I did something, and she whirled around, and she looked at me, and she said, I hate you. You're the meanest daddy in the world. Well, now part of me wanted to take her downtown to the Department of Human Services and introduce her to the meanest daddy in the world. You know, this is Roscoe. You can live with him, you know. But I stopped, and I thought about this, and I said, you know I lose my temper sometimes. And I know even sometimes I can be mean. And I bet sometimes I could feel like I'm the meanest daddy in the world. And I really am sad to the degree that hurts you. I want to grow there. You're still grounded. But I want to hear you there. All right? She never said it again. Now, what if I had said, don't you ever let me hear you talking like that to me again? Chances are I never would have. Chances are she never would have said that again. But where would that part of her heart go? I want her to bring that to me, and I want to hear her anger, and I want to understand it and care about it. And I'm still going to keep the limits, love and limits, right? We're not just going to go, oh, baby, you can share your hatred of me anytime you want. There's still the limits, but I want to hear it. This is the only way people grow, all right? All right, that's submission. We need to teach it. Now, the flip side of that, the other side of the growth, strength, submission piece is learn to be strong. God calls this steadfastness. God calls it faithfulness. This is about your kids having a chooser, being strong, being them. All right? We're going to do this one, then we'll take a break. This one's complex because we want our kids to submit, right? We're the parents and they're not. But think about it. What if that's all we teach them? I mean, like, how are the compliant adults doing in life? You know? Again, I find most Christian parenting books kind of swing in on this one and this one alone. Kind of like focus number one, teach your children to submit to authority in the home like we submit to God's authority. And that's kind of it for them. And sure, making choices and submission are 2 of our 7 abilities. All right? That's 28-something% of our parenting. That is a part of it. But I hear God calling us to do an array of things, not just to obey and submit. I hear him calling us to wisdom and to forgiveness and to steadfastness and to humility and to being strong and telling the truth. Not just submission. I see a lot of kids as young adults who were raised just to do as they were told. And now they're adults and they're terrified because all they ever learned was to bend the knee and submit. They're a child in a world full of parents and they don't know what to do. All right? So in addition to teaching submission, I counterbalance that with we need to teach our kids to learn how to be strong, okay? If they're going to deal with reality, God calls us to a lot of things, all right? Here's a way of saying it. One of the things I say is that parenting has 2 goals, roots and wings, protect and prepare, all right? In other words, roots where we give them all that love and they're feeling nested and safe and connected. Wings is where we're giving them some power and helping them learn to see that they're strong and be them. God made us to do this. You can see it start with toddlers. Ironically, what's more difficult than a toddler? What do they start saying? Me, mine, no. And what's happening is you start seeing a little self develop, a little will develop in the beginning of their identity, all right? Now, a lot of the authoritarian types say, ooh, we need to squish that out. That's some sort of rebellion coming in. Well, maybe kind of. But it's also the beginning of a person. Someone who can say, this is who I am. So let's look at two parts of this real quick. Number one, identity, and number two, strength. How do we help them get a sense of identity? How do we help them get a sense of strength? Number one, identity. This is kind of who am I? We're not teaching them self-centeredness here. They don't need any help with that, right? This is about helping them develop a sense of me. In other words, how do I live life without needing to ask all the time, what is everybody else doing? How do I know sort of what I value? Who is me in the image of God? This is Martin Luther saying, here I stand, I can do no other. Okay? I was talking to a mother the other day, and she has a child who's about 8, and he had a conflict at school, and she decided she was going to ask him how he wanted to handle the conflict. I'm like, okay. Well, he told her how he wanted to handle it, and he handled it. I'm like, wow. I mean, that's kind of identity at work. Here's his chance, even at age 8, and she's asking him, how do you want to handle it? Put a finger on your pulse, Junior. How would you like to handle it? And he actually did, okay? Now, if she doesn't want her own personal Kim Jong-un on her hand, she's going to also have to tell him what she wants matters too, right? This isn't tell me what you want, Johnny, and you get to rule the world. But it is tell me what you want, Johnny, so you can function in the world. We want him to be able to function, all right? So this is where we look for opportunities to sort of inquire and welcome and make room for our child asking who they are. Identity. In other words, they don't get to decide whether they do their homework, but they can decide whether they do their homework first or get a snack first, or they can decide whether they do music or do baseball, or they can, I've laid out 2 outfits you get to pick. In other words, we ask questions. We make room. What is it that you like? What is it that you want? And that be part of our parenting. We act like a mirror sometimes. You really love baseball, don't you? Or how did you feel about that? When we're asking questions like that, we're creating this sort of open invitation to say, who you are is something I'm interested in. That teaches mattering, like that love thing we were talking about. I also think this is a place to call out that compliant child. In other words, if you'll notice, different kids are going to have different blind spots in different one of these areas. Some of your children are already have too much sense of self, right? We don't need to teach them any more strength. Some of your kids are going to be too compliant. If you have a child who never disobeys you, always does what you say, I want to worry in kind of a different sense. In other words, I want to push that child a little bit to learn more identity. I had one that was very compliant and a pleaser and always trying to take care of me, and I fired her. I would come in from work, and she'd go, how was your day at work, Daddy? And I'd go, oh, it was okay. It was kind of tough, though. I'm really tired. She'd go, okay, y'all. Dad had a hard day at work. Y'all be quiet. Turn that TV down. And I'm like, this is so pathological, right? So I fired her. I said, no. I don't need you to take care of me. I'm a big boy, and I've got your mom, and I can take care of myself. You go be a kid. Go fight with your sisters and, pick your nose and whatever kids do, but don't try to take care of me, all right? And I actually did too good a job of that. She went the other direction by the time she was a teenager. But I want to be careful about a child who's too compliant. This is not selfishness. Biblically speaking, this is stewardship. This is like when Joshua leads the people to the promised land and he says, choose ye this day whom ye will serve. In other words, look inside and ask who you are and what you value. He's asking about this. He's asking about identity. All right? All right, number 2, we need to teach them about strength. Yeah, stewardship. That's what it is. Strength. Sometimes we need to show our children they are strong. And they will help you know when you need to do this. we're going to talk about this one some more tomorrow, so I'm going to be skimmy again. There'll be a point at which you will see your children, especially around school age, come to you with problems you will find difficult to fix. Like, I'm afraid of the weather, or somebody's being mean to me at school, or I'm afraid of you dying, or I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to go to sleep. You aware of these kind of problems that your children bring? And you keep reassuring them, and that doesn't help. Well, the reason that it doesn't help to try to reassure them and make this better with roots, with love, with nurture, is because you can't fix these kind of problems with roots and with nurture. You have to fix these kind of problems with wings. You have to fix these kind of problems with helping your children see their strength. In other words, when they say, I'm so afraid of the weather, our answer can't be, well, it's going to be okay, baby, come crawl up in the bed with me. It's going to have to be something in which we show them more their strength. We'll talk about that a ton tomorrow. But they go, I'm bored. That's your cue to go, well, then this is your chance to find something that you can do on your own without me. And we push them to be strong, all right? Kids, a lot of kids, half kids, will default to letting you manage all their problems for them. Or they're not picked at baseball, and they come inside. But I didn't get picked in the game. Be kind to them, be nurturing to them, and then go, now I want you to go back outside in the yard and get yourself in that game. I know you can do it. And we push them to be strong, all right? I was talking to a mom the other day who's got a 3-year-old who she just loves to cuddle and snuggle, and they love those sweet snuggle time, cuddle times, and that's just so precious and all that. But he won't stay in his bed at night, and he's always crawling out and coming and getting with them. And kind of all they're teaching is the nurturing part. So part of what we need to be building is also that independence thing too, okay? This is a huge place for dads to swing in, this whole power, strength, independence thing. You get a dad who can say, son, here, let me show you how to be strong. That kid's pushing on you, let me show you how to fight back. You have a dad who can teach a child to be strong like that, that kid's unstoppable. So dads, here's a great place for you to swing in, all right? So, identity and power. They're as important as submission, all right? Now, blind spots. One of the reasons my model can be helpful is because we're hitting the 7 basic things kids need, and as you will notice, different kids have different blind spots and need more help in some areas than in others. Like we had one who was born all nurtury and touchy and feely, and she got that love thing. She was mincemeat on the playground, though. Other kids could push her around. She needed to learn about strength. We had another child who was all strong and independent and could handle the world. We had to work to help her soften. So one of the ways I want you to use this model I'm teaching you is as a grid to sort of see where your children's blind spots are. So, as we're talking about strength, some of your kids need no help at all in the strength department, right? They already are Kim Jong-un. I was working with a couple a year or two ago, and they had this teenage daughter who was running their house, all right? And I was talking to them about how to push back on her and set some limits on her and how to speak to her. And they're like, oh my gosh, we could never say that to her. She would never speak to us again. I'm like, oh my gosh, worst fate in the world, you know? She doesn't need more empowerment. She needs somebody to take her away her glittery pink cell phone until she stops saying, oh my gosh, y'all are so retarded, all right? She doesn't need more empowerment, all right? All right. Let's stop there and take a break for 15 minutes, and we can come back and do some more questions, and then we'll finish up our other 3 capacities. Ready, break. Thank you all. A couple of updates from the break. I had one parent say, my oldest child was really compliant and not real strong. My next child was really very strong and a lot of backbone but needed softening. This person was thinking the way I want you thinking. I want you to have a model for the different aspects of character. Also, us and the twins are making some progress. We got some work done back there during the break. We'll try to share it with you when we've come up with a evil plan to manage the evil twins, okay? Wonder Twins power activate. That's what we're trying to undo, right? Yeah. We're working on that. Okay. So, as I said, I'm going to push you tonight. You got to work hard tonight. Friday night's hard on a parenting conference because we're looking at the whole big picture, and we'll slow it down some once we're done with this. We'll do some questions before we're done tonight, and tomorrow we'll really try to get more and more practical. But I want you to get the big picture. All right, so love. Understanding choices and consequences and learning to choose wisely. The ability to bend the knee and to submit to God and to anyone over me. The ability at the same time to still be strong and steadfast and know who I am and be able to handle yuck. All right? Which kind of leads us to the fifth one. The ability to handle. Oh, wait a minute. I may be out of order here. I get it. Right. The next two are about managing my emotional world. We had love and limits. We had strength and submission. And the next two are about managing the emotional world inside of me. Step number 1 on that, ability number 5, is dealing with bad, dealing with yuck, understanding forgiveness, dealing with life being disappointing. We alluded to this earlier with that first question. In other words, how do I help my child not be a perfectionist? How do I help them learn to deal with disappointment or failure? None of us are born with the ability to deal with the fall. Okay? We were created to live in the Garden of Eden. Nobody changed the motherboard software package. We're still born, and we wake up, and your kids go, oh my gosh, I must have gotten off at the wrong planet. This place stinks. They start encountering how fallen it is, and they start hollering about it. We all hate it. None of us are equipped to deal with this world. We were created to live in a garden, right? In fact, the position that most people assume when they encounter pain is some sort of position of protest, all right? In other words, we attack others. You know, this is inexcusable. Or we attack ourselves, like I'm just a terrible, no good, horrible person, all right? Or we become demanding and want to escape. You know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I want, things to escape from how bad life can be. So how do we help our kids learn to develop the ability to manage the yuck in life in a sober, strong way? Well, number 1, we come alongside of them in their pain, all right? We're not going to rescue them. We're not going to make it all better. We'll talk about this tomorrow. We come alongside of them. Be very careful about rescuing kids from their manageable pain. Here's another one of the secrets of the universe. Pain itself does not harm children. Unresolved pain harms children, okay? It's a natural thing for a parent to want to protect their children from any kind of suffering. But if we can manage that tension and let our children engage things that are difficult, but be with them in it, they actually will be stronger. Pain that's brought into a relationship makes us stronger. Go read Romans 5. Pain produces perseverance, and perseverance proven character, and proven character hope, and hope does not disappoint. Isn't that kind of how it goes? When we encounter pain and are with somebody, and they get it, and they care, and they're with us, somehow it makes us get better, all right? What I hear in the office is not, oh my gosh, Dad was a crazy alcoholic. What I hear in the office is, oh my gosh, Dad was a crazy alcoholic and no one ever talked about it. There's the hook. Unresolved pain is what harms children. So step 1 is we're making sense of our kids struggling in the world. As I said, we'll talk about those again tomorrow. Step 1 is to resist that temptation and want to rescue them, and let's walk alongside them in it. That means attenders. All we're doing, remember, with attending, we're just trying to engage them at the first level. They've missed that nap. It's been an hour beyond when the nap. They're starting to fragment and scream and yell, and we manage our frustration. And maybe all we do is just whisper in their ear as we're dragging them home. I know it's so hard. I know, baby. We're just letting them know we get it, all right? You don't know it when you do that, but you're helping that child metabolize that pain. School-age kid. We talk to them about it. Every kid got a hit but you? Oh, man, dude. Wait, your best friend has a new best friend and they're being mean to you? Sweetheart, nothing hurts worse than that. Now here I'm just being with her. I'm not fixing it. I'm not rescuing her. I'm not blowing it off. 10 years from now you won't remember this, okay? I'm being with her in it, all right? And what we're doing is we're teaching them when that happens that it can be okay. You're in pain now, but if love is present, you can be okay. Love heals pain. And what you'll see is you'll start to see your kids get this inside if you live this way with them. They're in pain and you're with them. And I remember ours when they had little doll babies. And one of the things that made me the happiest is they would hold their doll baby and they go, he's all right. He's okay. And I'd be going, oh my gosh, that's what they've internalized. In other words, they've gotten that from us, that comfort in the middle of your pain. Somebody's going to say, I'm with you and I love you and it's okay. That's just priceless. They've taken in that comfort, all right? Now we're hauling the mail, right? Just like we said that with and connection and love and limits heals brokenness and sinfulness. Remember Callie and I hate you, you're the meanest daddy in the world? With and connection is what heals our pain too. That's why therapy works. I'm not even really sure why. Why is it if my pain is known in a relationship with you, why is it that makes it better? I don't know. Pain alone is doubled. Pain with is halved. This gets into, remember our discussion at the marriage conference about the body of Christ and how we bring our pain into relationship with one another and it metabolizes? That's the same principle here with our kids, okay? Shame and loss and sorrow and pain is always healed in loving presence. So we'll talk tomorrow about how we're not going to try to fix it and make it all better with our kids. We're not going to blow them off. Number one, we walk alongside. That whole come alongside piece that I'm telling you. Secondly, how we help our kids deal with the yuck in life. And this is the good news and the bad news at the same time. Unfortunately, the most powerful way that we teach our kids how to manage the yuck in life is by letting them see and experience how we deal with our own disappointments and our own losses and keep our poise. And I told you it was bad news. In other words, can they see us engage disappointment and yuck and not blow our stack, right? So, you want to cringe together, like as a group? In other words, here's the principle. What I tell parents all the time. You can't be any more than X minus 1 is upset about an event in your child's life as they are. X being the integer of how upset they are, okay? So what I see all the time is daughter doesn't get cheerleader, mom is freaking out, all right? Or a lot of school anxiety. The child has school anxiety, and you'll find a ton of anxiety in the parent. You can't be any more than X minus 1 as upset as the child is. This is one of the reasons that children, teenagers will have big problems and not tell their parents. Because now they have two problems. I didn't get cheerleader, and mom is freaking out, okay? So the rule is X minus 1. You can be only X minus 1 as upset as they are, all right? So attending age. You know how they're always... 3, 4-year-olds, everything's a catastrophe. It's like they're not thirsty. All of a sudden they just decompensate from thirst, you know. It's like they have to have, it's like needing the antidote to a quick-acting poison. They need this, drink really quick. And that urgency is something we need to speak into. I was talking to a mom the other day, and she came up, what she does with her 3-year-old who's very dramatic and intense, is she's come up with what she calls no biggie, no prob. And he's like, brother just ate the last cookie. And she's like, no biggie, no problem. We can handle this. And she's showing him, no biggie, no problem. Now he toddles around the house going, no biggie, no biggie, no biggie. All right? In other words, how they see us react, when they see our poise, what they see is huge. Now, if you're like me, that makes you depressed. Because as a parent, I'm overreacting all the time. And I'm being a complete idiot and making too big a deal out of everything, okay? So, good news, remember? John's theme song. We show him our poise or our humility. In other words, what's my theme song? The only thing better than a perfect parent is a humble parent. Exactly. So when you mess up, cool. You overreact, cool. You drop the ball, you're a jerk. You're going, biggie, biggie, it is a biggie. All right? Then swing back in. Remember? We're swinging back in. I made too big a deal out of that. God, I did like a total jerk. Here's the best secret of the universe. We teach grace by needing grace. This is the background of everything I'm teaching you. What I'm teaching you here is like the Bible. I'm going to tell you God's law, and then I'm going to show you the cross. I'm going to tell you the way you're supposed to live, and then I'm going to show you grace. And it's just like God. This is how you're supposed to live. And this is the grace if you can't do it. In other words, I'm not telling you have to handle all the disappointments and failures in your life and your children. You have to handle those with grace. I'm announcing to you that you can. You can screw it up, and there's room for that. And in fact, that's going to help your kids actually learn this. What we're teaching them is that love is bigger than the bad. The moral of the story, how do you deal with yuck? How do you deal with badness in life? The moral of the story is that love is bigger than the bad. We don't have to run to anesthesia or protest or anger to deal with yuck. Love is where we run. That's God's answer, all right? So I just screwed up. I made too big a deal out of it. I need your forgiveness. You see how we're talking about badness right here? My badness. I failed. I don't have room for that. Do you? And we interact with our children about that. Do you see how this also helps them with the other side of yuck? We've just been talking about the yuck in life, that life's full of disappointment or not getting cheerleader or whatever. What about the flip side of that? What about yuck in me? In other words, shame. Like, how do we help our kids with shame? Shame says, there's something wrong with you. You're different and worse than the rest of us. And frankly, shame is something we're all born with. It's not like we all have, think about it. Why is everybody insecure? Why does everybody have fear of rejection? It's not because all of our mamas bought us shoes when we were 5 years old that were too little or something. We're all born under shame. It's part of what it means to be born under the law. Okay, that's why everybody's insecure, right? Well, in order to help children with shame, we actually have to unshame children. In other words, if you were just neutral, your children would grow up and have shame. They'd feel worse than other people, or they'd feel insecure or whatever. We got to unshame them. What does that sound like? I used to welcome mine to the Screwed Up People's Club. Like I do y'all. It's very important to, as I was saying during Q&A earlier, it is very important to me to not be the expert. It's very important to me to do conferences as a fellow body of Christ member with y'all. That's why if I don't know the answer to the question, I don't try to shuck and jive an answer. I'm going to go, I don't know. I'm going to come back during the break and try to figure it out. Okay? I want you to see what brokenness in leadership looks like. I get the vibe that your leaders do this. But that's the way we unshame children. We go, welcome to the club. You guys don't feel like you can do stuff? Guess what? They asked me a question I couldn't answer. Beat that. So you feel like you're a bad parent? Yeah, so was I. I'm a bad conference leader. I didn't know the answer to her question. In other words, grace is big enough. I want to say to my kids, I remember one of mine was really upset once because she had screwed up. And she was really down on herself. And I said, really, actually, you're just doing your job. And she's like, what do you mean? I said, well, I have a job. I'm a psychologist. And, I do therapy, whatever. You got a job. You're a kid. Your job is to screw up so you can learn. That's the only way we learn is by screwing up. So you screwed up, but you're doing your job. That's how we learn. And I wanted to normalize it to her. I wanted to unshame her. I wanted to say, welcome to the club of people who can't do stuff great. Okay? Love's bigger than that. Love is bigger than whether you do it great. All right? That's what it looks like and feels like with feet on it. Okay? I want you to feel that and get that. All right? All right, dealing with bad in the world, dealing with bad in ourselves. Huge piece. And that's what it feels like and looks like to do that. All right, I'm just going to skim this one because we're dealing with it, because this night's already real intense, and because we're dealing with it indirectly all the time. But how do we help our kids learn to manage their emotional world? And we can talk more about it if y'all have questions, but I don't want to go into super detail on it. Basic principle is this. Kids are basically concrete thinkers. Okay? That's why Sesame Street doesn't talk about the concept of threeness. It talks about three cookie. Okay? And likewise, children are concrete feelers. They don't say at the checkout counter, I am so sad you didn't buy me that Zag nut. I'm really sad. I was looking forward to that. No, they just go, blah, and they're out on the floor throwing a tantrum. They do what they feel, right? So I had a client who told me he remembered being so upset and so hurt by something his parents said, and he had just gotten this whole new glorious box of Crayola crayons. And they were in his room. And he was so upset and so angry at them, he went to his room and he broke every one of the crayons. Now you can imagine we did some important things in therapy with that. But I thought it was such a powerful image of what was he trying to say? What was he feeling? Children can't say what they feel. They do it. So this step is learning to help kids learn to do what I call mentalizing their feelings. To be able to feel something instead of doing something. All right? We do that in two ways. Number one is we're going to set limits on the doing. In other words, I'm never going to grow in an out-of-control behavior where I'm acting out my feeling unless there's a consequence, like what we said in the discipline section. So just cross-reference that one. When you're disciplining a child, you're creating a situation that forces them to have to look inside at what they're feeling. Okay? That's not the important one here. The important one here is I want you to learn to use words to help them learn to put words on what they feel. All right? I call that mentalizing. I'm going to make what they feel something they can think about and talk about. You know the stereotypical psychobabble phrase, it seems like you're very angry. Okay? Yeah, we really do say junk like that. All right? Now, when we do that, though, we're not just doing psychobabble. We're literally naming a feeling for you. We're putting a tag on it so you can manage it better. Because you're angry, but you don't really know you're angry, and you need me to point at it and help you to see it. So you can go, wow, yeah, that is anger, isn't it? A lot of times we need that verbalization. I want to make it mental, not just physical. And in order for kids to learn to be able to have a feeling and not act on it, do you remember we talked about this at the marriage conference? Having a feeling and not acting on it. Here, you'll remember this example. You're driving along and your wife says, hey, honey, turn right up here. And you go, I know how to drive. Right? Now, why did you do that? You were feeling something, okay? But instead of going, wow, I'm kind of feeling like you're saying I'm a dumb person who needs his wife to tell him how to drive. Do you still respect me? You know, instead of talking about the feeling, we're going to do something, you know, like attack your wife. Okay, so we're trying to help your children not be like you, all right? So anyway, kids can understand a lot more than you think, like even if they can't talk it. And like you can understand Mozart before you can play it, right? So I want to start telling children, you know, that thing that made you just hit your brother, that's called anger. And that's cool. I get it. You're angry. But I can't let you hit your brother. So I'm putting words on what they're feeling. A lot of times the reason that kids act out and misbehave is not just because they're little gangsters. It's because they have emotions that they don't know how to put words on, and they bubble out into behavior. What we'll see, I bet, later on in Q&A is somebody will ask me a question about a child who keeps acting out and nothing in the discipline works. A lot of times what I say is that child needs to be heard. In other words, there's enough going on for them emotionally that it's driving their behavior. So we work to help mentalize it. I remember when Callie was, she was 3, maybe not quite 3. I was interning in Memphis, and we were at the grocery store, and she was sitting in the little kid's seat in the grocery cart. And this lady comes up to her, like this big Memphis lady with big hair and a lot of lipstick. And little Callie's sitting in the stroller, and the lady's like, well, aren't you a cute one, aren't you? Like that. And Callie's just as wide-eyed, you know. And I went over to her, and she scrambled up on me like a little monkey. And I put my mouth to her ear, and I said, that lady scared you, didn't she? And she kind of hung there for a minute until the lady was safely gone. So anyway, we get home, and Norma goes, so how was the grocery store? And Callie said, a yay scared me. Boom, right? So we're building this category. If I can talk about what I feel, I can get a hook on it. Huge for relationships, for spirituality, on and on, all right? More on that later if you want. All right, finally, last ability, love, the ability to make wise choices, the ability to submit, the ability to be strong, the ability to make sense of yuck in life, the ability to manage my emotional world. I ain't shortchanging you this weekend here, all right? Lastly, the ability to know and understand God. Right? I mean, ultimately, that's what we're created for. And I know that that's one of our goals, big picture, so it ought not to be one of our specific capacities, but I do want to talk to you all some tonight and more tomorrow if you want, about what does it look like for us to specifically, directly address and speak into their relationship with God. I mean, we're talking about character. That character doesn't have a whole lot of meaning outside of our relationship with him. So how do we teach them about God? firstly, we've already been talking about that, okay? It's not like we're suddenly switching to the religious segment of our program, okay? If you're engaging your kids think about what we talk about: love, wisdom, submission, steadfastness and strength, humility, logging your own eye, forgiveness, making sense of shame, managing my impulses. This is God talk, okay? We were already talking about building for them the software of what it looks like to be a Christian and to relate to God. So then when they learn content about God later on, we're ahead of the game. We've already built this operating system, okay? A huge reason that people have spiritual problems is not because they're bad people or because they like sinning or something. It's because literally they have character blind spots in some of these areas we've been talking about. In other words, think about it. How's your obedience going to go if you never learn the capacity to submit, which you have to learn, remember? How is your understanding of grace going to go if you never learn that whole issue of forgiveness and dealing with yuck in life that we talked about? Okay? And a lot of people see these things missing and they go, oh, I just don't have enough faith. And I'm like, no, you were never taught about grace. You never experienced it in a life with a person. How are you going to make sense of it in a life with God? So we've been talking about building that character all along, okay? That's basically how therapy works, by the way, and how we grow. We need to do a conference one day on how we grow. And what does it look like for adults to use these same categories and grow in your own heart in those character blind spots now? Let's do that someday. Anyway, point being, there's not religious aspects of life and psychological. I like to pull them together, as Jason said. All right, but how do we specifically teach them about God? Let's talk about that. Two categories: content and experience. Now, some content, obviously, overt teaching. That's great. Teach your kids about God. Have family devotions. Mine went to a Christian school. What they learn here at church. The actual content overtly taught. That's great. Though we always had trouble with the family devotion thing, inevitably in our home, family devotions degenerated into you will sit down and you will worship as you are told. Do you understand? You know, so we just bombed on that. Did what we could. And, prayers lasted longer than the devotions, and we all said prayers together. And then when they started, texting down, can I just text my prayer down? We're like, no. We've just completely lost. The wheels are off, Anyway. So, overt teaching. But what I want you to mostly get regarding content here is, let me put it this way. When God was asked, where do you teach content, he didn't say family devotions. When God was asked this in Deuteronomy 6 and 11, I think, what he said was, teach them where? As you rise up and as you lay down and as you walk along the road. In other words, teach them about him all the time. Make life a family devotion. Okay? Now, I enjoyed this. And I want to tell you a couple of stories about our family because I want you to enjoy it too. Get creative on this one. Play with it. God's there all the time. Talk about him. Your child says, look, a rainbow. I want you to go, oh my gosh. Okay, how cool is this? Because, all right, God made it in such a way that light is usually kind of white, right? Like sunlight is usually kind of yellowy white. But if it goes through a cloud, he made it to where it busts out into like Roy G. Biv. What is that, 9 colors? I don't know. It's amazing. He's out of control. He's like an artist all the time. Talk to him, okay? I used to cook with mine, and they would all, want to have a turn cracking an egg. Well, I remember one time, that if you hold an egg just with your 4 fingers, not your thumb, just your 4 fingers, it's almost impossible to crack it. Try it. As an adult, it's hard. I think maybe impossible. Anyway, for kids, it's certainly impossible. And they'd all take turns like that, and I go, yeah, see? God made eggshells to where, you could protect little chickens from goobers like y'all, see? Bring him in. We used to have a game we'd play to where you taste the food before you said the blessing. That way, you'd know how thankful you actually were, okay? This might not be that good. Kind of like, yeah, well, thanks anyway, God. But, or it'd be like, you get your chicken nuggets, like, okay, what would happen if I took these away from you? Like, we're going to take them away and throw them away. No, Daddy, no. Okay, well, then that lets us know really how thankful we are. Like, God, thank you that Daddy's not going to take these away. All right, play with this. Have fun with this. I'll tell you my mic drop. Only did this once. This is my best one. So it goes in the parenting conference, right? Nintendo 64 comes out when my kids are little, and you can't get them. They're gone by Christmas, all right? And I tried everywhere. Nowhere. And then I read somewhere that Steven Spielberg couldn't find one for his kids for Christmas. And I thought, give it up, Cox. So I told my kids, I said, look, they're going to get them again after New Year, and I promise you I will get you a Nintendo 64. Partly because I wanted to play GoldenEye, but that's another show. Anyway, so about January, it comes in the paper. Toys R Us has them, so I round up the girls. They're out in the yard playing, and I'm like, let's go. They've got Nintendo 64s at Toys R Us. So we all jump in the truck. We go to Toys R Us. We get the Nintendo 64. They're taking turns carrying the bag, and they're opening it up in the back seat. And all of a sudden, I thought of the story. And I told Callie, I said, I have a beat-up old Bible in the back of the truck. As I turned to Matthew 7, and I don't remember the verse right now, but I did back then. And I said, read that passage. And she read it, and she said, if you, being sinful fathers, know how to give good gifts to your children, then how much more will your Father in heaven give to those who love him and follow his commandments? And I said, guys, thank you, Callie. I said, guys, you weren't even thinking about this thing. You were out playing. But I promised you that I would get you a Nintendo 64. I promised it. And I did not forget my promise to you. And I found that Nintendo 64. And I called you from the yard. And I put you in my truck. And I drove you to Toys R Us. Because I love you. And I will not forget my promises to you. Now, I'm a knuckleheaded, dumb dad. How much more will your Father in heaven treat you like that? You can get chances like that all over the place. Though that's the only time I did something that cool. That's why I made it in the conference, right? So principle is everything is the way it is because God made that. Just talk to your kids about it, okay? Number 2, experience. Unfortunately, again, the most powerful way that our kids learn about this particular ability is by them seeing how we treat them. Experience. You know how you can know something about God, but you don't feel something about God? What I call the head-heart gap. I know I'm forgiven, but I don't feel forgiven. Why is that? How is it? Where do we learn that gut about God? Well, we learn content about God from our, reading or study or whatever. We learn experience, we learn our gut about God from the ways in which we are related to. Good news and bad news again, all right? So that means when you are cuddling that little baby, you attenders, and you're settling them down, you're building a reference point for them of what being held means. Even God uses that reference point. Mother may forget her nursing child, but I will not forget you. God is like this. Or when that little 8-year-old runs to the door when you come in from work and you rub him on the head and your eyes are delighted to see him, you're building this layer, this deep unconscious context of this is how God receives you. This is the delight in his eyes when you run to him. How we treat our kids creates that emotional template for what God's like. Now, again, that makes me depressed, right? So where are we going to go with it? You getting it yet? Option number 1, great. Yeah, let your walk match your talk. Come to a parenting conference. Study, have your spouse and friends hold you accountable. Learn to be a better parent. Great. But, again, we all fail at that. So, again, option number 2, and the blessing, let your talk match your walk. Like we've been saying all night. Don't act like you got it all together since you don't. I want to come to my kids and go, I need grace as much as y'all. I struggled with my temper when I was a parent. I would get angry at them and be a jerk. And when they were around school age, I got them to help me with it. I got them to call me out on it. I said, look, if you guys screw up, you need discipline. But if I lose it and I'm a jerk and I'm angry and ugly, that's my own immaturity. And I want you to call me out on it. Because I don't seem to be handling it well. So you get a stun gun, and I want you to shoot me with it. Because I'm a jerk. I don't want to be a jerk. So it wasn't long after that Callie was about 9, and she comes in my room after some hullabaloo with me, and she's like, I know we did bad, Daddy, but you're just being mean. Instant anger management therapy, okay? In other words, I want to teach them about a relationship with God by showing them what a relationship with God looks like. That I need grace. Again, only thing better than a perfect parent is a humble parent. All right? That is the deepest spiritual education you can give them, that experience. Now, when somebody teaches them about God's grace, they have a reference point. Yeah, this is kind of like how Mom needed our grace when she was always screwing up, right? Right? Now, pat yourself on the back. We did all 7. I am not easy on my audiences with a parenting conference. I work you hard. But like I said, you're not going to get this anywhere else. And I want you to have this grid. Love, wisdom, submission, strength, forgiveness, emotional management, knowing God. And don't feel like you have to get all of this. I dumped a lot of junk on you. Go back and listen to the recording. Ask me some questions. But I want you to have this model. We just built you a model for parenting. Okay? The goal's not a well-behaved child. The goal is some kid who's in the image of God and starts to look more like Christ. A kid who can do adult life, and they just happen to be the same thing. And they just happen to also be what you need to be doing to have your kid get in the bathtub tonight. Okay? But, as we said, as we started, let's end this where we started it. Do not use this to put more pressure on yourself. Oh, it was a great conference. He told us 7 ways in which we're screwing up our kids. Don't do that, okay? Remember, parenting is a relationship, not a task. I tell parents sometimes that parenting is like a rowboat that has 5 holes in the bottom, and you have 2 knees and 2 hands, and there's always 1 hole left uncovered. This one time, I'll end with this story, and let's do some questions. My kids, I'd screwed something up, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. I screwed that up. And then I kept going. If you've noticed, I just kept going. I said, you gotta, pardon me. I've never been a dad before, so I'm kind of making this up as I go. And one of them in the back seat goes, well, is there like a book you can read? Or that's my kids. All right. Now, let's do questions. Yes, sir. Now, from here on, sky's the limit on questions, any category, any whatever. Not that I'll know the answer, but who was it? Twin dude.
Yeah, not about that.
Don't ask me about that.
Not
yet.
about that.
No,
No.
We're close. We're getting closer.
Yeah. So maybe your parents didn't model this, and so you've heard, I'm sorry, I messed it up like once.
Yeah.
Can you overdo it by swinging the other way, where you apologize for everything to your kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. Do you want to say more about that?
No.
Okay. I didn't really mean it. We're just supposed to say that as therapists. I'm just kidding. Okay, great question and a great counterbalance. I'm a very much of a human-to-human parent, and I could err on the side of being too human and not enough authority and not enough respect and not enough I am the parent. So we do need to walk this line between what we said earlier between about lovingly disappoint. Remember submission? Disappoint is first. Like, you got to do what I say. I'm the parent. You know, I got to make the rules or your lifestyle around here changes. And I'm a human and I understand it. So we're going to always be walking between those two. I'm going to maintain authority, but I'm also going to maintain humility. And we swing back and forth. Now, like any heresy, you can err on one side or the other. And some people become too authoritarian. And it's like, that's final, son. And that's kind of it. Or it's like, well, I guess, not everybody wants to do homework. So, yeah, fine, whatever. We don't have any limits. So we can always err in those. And so too much humility would be just as confusing to a child, a home with no authority structure. Okay? So we do need to balance it. Thank you.
That's a very general question.
Okay.
Just
your thoughts on screen time and all the different ages and what you recommend. Obviously, it's not the best thing in the world, but your recommendations of a healthy amount of screen time.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about this for a minute because it's an important subject. Screen time in general, let's talk about sort of TV first and application from that to like pads and phones and games and all of that. One of the things that sort of happened in our culture is that I find parents having a reticence, a reluctance to set real good limits about screen time. I think that it's imperative that you feel very comfortable setting limits on screen time. I believe that, let me put it this way, one of the reasons I like TV, given my job, is that my mind is active and working and on all day long. And TV is this passive receiving, I don't have to do anything but sort of like binge, okay? Now, that's one of the reasons I like it, given how tired my brain is, but it also reflects its danger. I think it's dangerous in that if that becomes the go-to for my entertainment with a child, as a child, I learn a passive receiver position in terms of entertaining myself. I don't live engaged with the world. I mean, I don't want to do the when I was a boy thing, but when I was a boy, it was sort of the go outside and play and build a treehouse and wreck on your bike and get a skint knee and drink out of the hose and, you get 2 shows on TV. I think setting limits on screen time is a very wise thing. This is really crazy, maybe the craziest thing you'll hear me say, but I believe it. I think that the constancy of TV and screens is why every kid you know has ADD. In other words, what is ADD? Boom, 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 boom. I'm not able to sort of control my mind to stay focused on a topic. What is TV? I'm passively not engaged managing the world. Instead, I'm getting bombarded with different inputs all the time. And all of a sudden, with the generation that watched a ton of TV, the generation we raised, you had this, everybody has ADD. And why do they have ADD? I don't know. Well, what I see with TV is that it teaches the mind to not be on focus. It teaches the mind to, like MTV, pop, 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 different things all the time, all right? So limitations there, I think, are very wise. You don't need to be, totally freaked out and anal, and there's no TV in our house, and we'll put that idiot box on the trash heap. No, it's not the devil. Use it with moderation like you use food or alcohol, okay? Now, once we move on up to screens and iPhones and computers and stuff, I see even more reluctance for parents, especially with teenagers and cell phones. I've done some research on this, in fact, and there's some very interesting research out there. If you want to pursue this more, a woman named Dr. Jean Twenge at the University of California, San Diego, she wrote a book, I think it's called iGen, and she's done a ton of research on screens, social media, phones, all that jazz for school-age kids and teenagers. Now, one of the things she learned was, did you expect an answer this comprehensive? I hope you were. Okay. It's like, really? You want me to talk about that? What she found was that beginning in 2012, 2012 was a time at which cell phone ownership, smartphone ownership, crossed the 50% mark with kids. And beginning at that point, as cell phone usage increased, concomitant right along with it in the same angle of growth was increase in depression, unhappiness, suicidal ideation in teenagers. And they thought, well, maybe that's just correlation, not causation. So they started doing all these studies of taking kids off of Facebook and then putting them back on Facebook and doing all these measurements of their happiness index. And they found there was a direct correlation, especially between social media and depression and unhappiness and suicide. And it's like 40% more. It's crazy. It's not like 5% more. It's crazy more. So this is new data, and it's new problems, and it's new information. And a lot of what she says is we don't know the full answer yet. We don't know the effect of a culture that's raised looking at phones and computers all the time. What will that do? What should we do? And they don't know exactly where to land on that yet because the guinea pigs are still out there, But one of the things she said is that I agree with is that parents seem uniquely reticent to deprive their children of their smartphones. And she says, do not feel that compunction. Moderation, limitation. Kids should have limits set on how much access they have to their phones, especially social media. A child shouldn't get a smartphone and social media until at least high school. Younger kids, they need a phone so they can contact us. Great. Get them a Razr. Get them a flip phone. All right? But once you introduce that social media world or the smartphone world, the kids start to show these symptoms. So she really encourages us to feel comfortable showing moderation and setting limits. I found a great article in New York Magazine. It was an interview with Steve Jobs when the iPad came out. And the guy in the New York Magazine says, so what do your kids think about the iPad, Steve? And he said, well, they hadn't seen it. We really have a lot of limits on our kids with screen time. Like, thank you, Steve Jobs. Okay. So anyway, that's my thoughts about it. Kids, I think there ought to be times in which there is no phone at dinner. Jean Twenge says that phone at bedtime is bad. It shouldn't even be in the same room because kids, it disrupts their sleeping, and especially with teenagers, disruption in their sleeping creates all sorts of craziness for them. Also, even if it's on silent, the light actually has a relationship to melatonin production in the brain, and gets in the way of sleeping. Just looking at your phone and checking it during the night sort of upsets your sleep cycle. She goes on and on and on, okay? Kids actually have been pushing back on screens some. I did a conference in New York and talked about this a lot at a preppy boarding school on Long Island. And the kids there are pushing back on screen themselves. They call it tech light. And they go to lunch and they all have to lay their phone face down in the middle of the table, and whoever picks up their phone the first pays for dinner. And they're sort of playing this game of let's go tech light, Even they're aware of the problems with that. So I don't know exactly where to draw the line, but realize that this is just like alcohol or Cheetos. You need to set some limits on how much, Okay? Go this way. Oh, I can walk behind you.
Thanks. Can you, and feel free not to answer this, can you speak a little bit to just the whole grid and just where I feel that I have my own blindness in a particular area?
Yeah.
So how can I help my child with that area, so to speak? That's all I could think about as you were talking tonight is how, I'm bad at that. So how am I going to be able to empower my child to grow in those particular areas? Can you say anything about that?
You, Eric, are close to the kingdom. Thank you. Let's close in prayer. Seriously. Last time I was here, your evil staff made me work really hard. And I did a marriage conference on Friday night and on Saturday morning. And I preached twice on Sunday, and I did Sunday school too. And on Saturday night, this year they're taking me to dinner because they've obviously learned something about grace. But last year they asked me to speak to the elders in the session on shepherding and how we help our people grow. And I talked about a similar model to this. And the most moving moment in the evening was this elder, one of your shepherds, one of your elders, said, John, I don't think I can do those things. I don't even know what they mean. And it shut the night down. We started feeling tears. And I said, you get it. In other words, as I told you, I'm not here to teach you to be a better parent. I'm teaching you how to create something wonderful with your children. And I told that man, I said, so you go into the home of a family in which there's marital strife or the loss of a child or financial problems, and you say, you know what, I don't know how to love y'all well, but I love y'all. And I don't really know how to do all the things you're supposed to do right now, but I'm your shepherd, I'm your elder, and I want to be with y'all in the best way I can. I said, you do that and the people of God will grow. So, like I said, this conference is like the Bible. This is the 10 Commandments, the 7 Commandments, and then here's the cross. And you go, I can't do any of these things. And Jesus says, he has been forgiven much loves much. So go love your kids, okay? It's the righteous and the ones who got it together and the ones who think they're right and the ones who think, check mark, all these things I've done since my youth. Those are the ones Jesus hammers because they are actually deluded enough to where they think they can do any of these things. So that's why I said you're close to kingdom. Because that position, that's the kind of dad I want. Thank you. Do y'all get the vibe? How this is about how to do it right and how to live in grace at the same time? Do you feel it? I want you to feel it. I want you to feel that. Because I'm not doing a good parenting conference if you just come away with the data. What do we do when our kid does so-and-so? I want to teach you that, but I also want bigger what Eric learned. Because that's where we touch our kids' hearts. Yes, ma'am.
We have 5 children, ages 11 to 4. One of them is dealing with depression at 10.
Pardon me?
One of them is dealing with depression and anxiety at age 10. And then the one underneath them is very strong-willed. So we're having to try to parent one who feels like he's just dirt all the time and nothing is good enough. And he tells us multiple times a day, when we correct him on something, I'm stupid, I'm so stupid, I'm so dumb, I wish I was never born. So then we've got repeat of that coming from the younger children.
Say that again.
We've got repeat of that coming copycat from the younger children.
They're saying the same kind
when
of
they do something wrong.
Uh-huh.
How do we like parent and teach them that no, we're all going to mess up, we're all going to screw up without that comment over and over and over, and deal with the child who's strong-willed. I don't know where I'm going with this. It's been a season.
Add the strong-willed piece. We're going somewhere good here.
He pushes the limits all day, every day. They had specific instruction this afternoon. Don't go down here to this place because we're trying to get ready to leave, blah, 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 blah. One kid, the kid who's depressed, got upset because he realized he had done something wrong. So he went out the door to that place, and little brother followed. But the little brother wasn't upset. He wasn't in trouble. He just went because that's where he wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
So now how do you correct the fact that both of them left the house when they weren't supposed to and did what they weren't supposed to do?
And 10-year-old's going to feel terrible about his infraction.
10-year came
Where's
home.
Power Struggle Boy at this point?
He
Is he
came,
down at the construction site?
No, they both came home. No, there's ponds in our neighborhood and lots of people.
How are you feeling about setting limits on Power Struggle Boy?
We are kind of out of control, and he cries every time that we try to correct him.
He cries?
He cries.
Like out of,
Like
what?
burst into tears, like, we can't figure it out. I don't know. But he cries all the time.
Does he ever bend the knee?
Mm-mm. Does he? Does he ever bend the knee?
Does he ever bend the knee? He's strong-willed. Does he ever submit? Does he ever come home from the construction site?
Mm-hmm.
Does he ever go upstairs and brush his teeth?
By the 5th time.
What sort of consequences are y'all using?
Those 2 got spanked more than the other 3,
Uh-huh.
but they were also the ones
How about
that
strong-willer?
He got spanked the most.
How old is he?
He's 8 and
All right, let's start. Let me talk about spanking for a second. Somebody asked me about spanking. I'm going to talk about discipline a lot tomorrow. Whole talk, okay? And you'll hear me talk a lot about natural consequences and consequences that fit the crime. You hear me use time out a lot. And people always ask me, what about spanking? My thought about spanking is this. I'm not a big fan of spanking, but not because I have some problem with spanking, but because I have some problem with less than efficient discipline. Okay? In other words, what we'll say tomorrow is, remember, we alluded to it tonight, good discipline says, I don't have a dog in this fight. You don't have to clean up your room. TV's not coming on to you clean your room, but that's up to you. You can read the classics, okay? In your squalor, all right? Now, see, I'm creating a situation in which the conflict's no longer me versus them, it's them versus their consequences. That's gold, because you get out of that power struggle. We'll talk about it. Spanking is like a camping stove. You know, it's like when you're out in the field, you need a place to heat up your mulligan stew. So a little Coleman stove is good, but that's not what I want to cook on at home. So if you're out at the mall and you need to pop somebody's leg, I get that. But as my default, I'm not going to go to that. I want to use something more, especially with a power struggle kid, I want to use something more about them. And that is, you don't get a treat, you get time out, you lose TV, you... Okay? Right, well, okay.
But none of the consequences are working.
Well, we'll talk about working tomorrow. And a lot of times with a strong-willed child, working means you're wanting them to obey you. You're going to have to give that up. With a strong-willed child, what I want to say is, you can do whatever you want. Here's the cost. And let them disobey. Oh, good. Well, we'll put you in timeout too. Okay, the watching piece, we're not going to give that a lot of power. Sort of like we're not going to give a lot of power to those watching the depressed one. Let's talk about him for a second. With a child who goes to frailty, I'm just terrible and I'm no good, and I want to, I imagine you've reassured him, like, no, honey, you are, okay? I don't want to go there. I want to say, you know, you're 10. And some sort of a decision that we all have to make as we get, about 10 or so, is what are we going to do with our screwing up? And it sounds like you have a part of you inside that's kind of mean and attacky and scary and tells you you're bad all the time. If you want, I want us to kind of get on the same team and start pushing back on him. Because he doesn't know what he's talking about. In fact, Jesus says something otherwise. We say something otherwise. But that mean old part of you, he's always telling you stuff. Now, I'm not going to be able to walk alongside your life all the rest of your life and remind you that that's not true. You're going to have to at some point decide whether you want to tighten your belt and fight this part or not. Because a lot of times kids who have that sort of mentality don't push back on their fear. They don't push back on their shame. And it's like I said about teaching kids about strength. In the same way that you can't convince a child they don't need to be afraid of the weather, with children who feel a lot of fear or children who feel a lot of self-condemnation, you can't convince them that they are forgiven enough to let it go. You sort of have to go, you know what, I'm going to put this in your court, and I bet you're strong enough to learn to push back on it. I want to start teaching that kid about power and about some traction to push back on self-criticism. And I also want to objectify that for him. Like, notice I said that mean old part of you wants to say. Okay, I do that with fear a lot. I'm too afraid to go to school. I'm like, yeah, right. I get that. School's pretty scary. But what's really happening is you have a part of you inside that wants to scare you all the time. He wants to tell you something bad's going to happen. And I want us to push back on him. And you start to create this us versus him mentality of those emotions. When you have a child who's run a lot by emotions, it's important to sort of advocate with him against that part, to where he has to be empowered some to push back on it. All right? So now, when the other ones start to mimic it, I want to swing in the same way with them. Wow, you guys want to feel really terrible about yourselves? That would really stink. We love you, but we're going to let you pick to do that if you want. And you have a lot of emotional tentacles down in them, and I want you to pull them out some and let them sort of well, that's where you want to live, okay? I don't think you should, because all of us make sense of screwing up, and you're going to have to do that too. That's a great job for a dad. It's with him, with depressed anxiety one, he needs empowerment. He needs somebody to say, you have an option to push back on this or to be run by it for the rest of your life. And let's work to fight it. You and me. We're going to fight it. We're not going to let that guy get the last say. He doesn't get to tell you this. So I want to engage that kid in that kind of way. Now, back to Power Struggle Boy. I wasn't kidding when I said parents who live in a power struggle are always trying to make their kid do something. And once you get in a power struggle, you're going to lose. So we got to get you out of the power struggle. I tell you what, let's talk about this one more tomorrow because I'm going to do a whole talk on getting out of power struggles, and we can come back to it. What's your name? Callie. My daughter's Callie. Spelled differently. Right. We're kind of late. Let's do one or two more. Yes.
Okay, so with the discipline part, you mentioned that the because I said so is just, it's not healthy.
I don't like it.
So, devil's advocate, Carl knows too well that I'm a devil's advocate. But how do I put this? So we homeschool. So I am the only authority in the house. I mean, with my husband, there's no other bad guy, if that makes sense. There's no other, your teacher is going to be upset if you don't get this, or you're going to make a bad grade if you don't. I'm the only bad guy. And so I feel like, not just because I read something years ago that said that explaining to a child your reasoning, your why, creates a situation of agreement instead of obedience. That if they say, why do I have to do this? And you explain to them and then they do it, then they're agreeing with you. They're not obeying you.
Yeah, right.
And so in setting them up with their relationship with God one day, God does not always explain himself to us.
Right.
And there's many situations where I don't have time to sit there and go, oh, I know it really, really stinks and you don't want to go to the library, but you get your shoes on and get in the car anyways.
Yeah.
And so how do you balance that sense of, as a parent, I don't owe you an explanation, but with empathy at the same time?
And how does that connect with because I said so?
I feel like, because I feel like when I say I don't have to explain myself to you, you just need to do what I'm asking you to do right now. I feel like that's just another way of saying because I said so.
All right, let me ask you this question. Do your children typically live in a position of, I'm going to resist anything you say unless I get an explanation? Is that a pattern? Is that a lifestyle for them?
With one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, our strong-willed one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So same kind of, and I've learned not to engage in the fight and say, I'm not dancing with you right now. We're just going to go. I don't have to explain why.
Yeah.
But to me, when you said you can't, saying because I said so is unhealthy, that kind of went, well, that's my default,
I don't hear you saying that. And besides, I can be hyperbolic. I admit it. There's room.
I wasn't
for
trying to,
because I
wasn't
said
trying to
so.
get you, but yeah.
I'm dramatic and emotional and hyperbolic, and I go, absolutely never do this. And that's never true. Right? So I got room for, there's room, okay? So my point is, let me tell you why I come down so strong on it. Because it's the only thing you hear in Christian parenting is this authoritarian model, because I said so, because I represent God's authority, and the authority model runs everything, and there's no room for being humans or wisdom or learning or the process of making choices out of what leads to life versus what leads to death, and the wisdom of all that, and the nuance of Scripture. It's just this authority thing. So I resist it. So you have a child who basically is going to resist you, and I agree when a child goes, why? How old is this child?
9.
Yeah. Okay, when a child of school age, and especially then on in a teenager, goes, why? What I always just say to mine is that a question like you're wondering, or is it an invitation to begin the debate? Because I'll answer and give you my reasons, but if you have but Dad, but that's not true, but I'm not going to answer. So are you just interested in information? I will tell them. But in regard to your question, I want you to have a shorthand that sort of says, I don't need to sit down and sort of convince you all the time. And you may not even have to, I don't want you having, what we'll talk about tomorrow is the moment you feel a power struggle, you have to back up and give them a choice. In other words, well, I'm not really going to answer the question. We're getting in the car now, and if you don't, I'm just going to let you take as much time as you need getting in the car. And you're going to owe me 4 times that in time out, so indulge yourself. Now, usually those children will learn pretty quickly, okay? And you won't live in a pattern of that all the time. But the strong-willed one, they will kind of keep pushing that button. So I want you to have shorthand of where you're not having to come up with a new discipline all the time. So let's think. So you're going, what was your example, going to the library?
Like, going and doing something he doesn't want to do, for instance. Okay. Why? Why do we have to go do that? I don't want to do that,
Let me play with you.
Okay.
See if I can figure something out.
Oh, no.
I don't think I'm going to answer that, and I don't think I want to keep doing this all day. I don't even know what the cost will be. We're going to get in the car, and if you don't come, it's going to cost you a lot later, so you get to pick. I'm not going to play this. What would you do with that?
Depends. Perhaps negotiate, sulk, or just be, sullen. So negotiating.
Sullen's great as long as he gets in the car.
Yeah.
What does negotiate sound like?
Negotiate. Well, what do you mean? Are you gonna, And I feel like I have to give something.
I'm not talking about that. What's his name?
Isaiah.
Isaiah. I'm not talking about that.
Yeah.
I'm getting in the car.
Yeah. So you can give a lingering threat without it even having something concrete in
Oh,
the moment.
yeah.
Okay. I don't have to go through the Rolodex of potential threats at every moment. Okay.
And people with teenagers always freak out at this and go, oh my gosh, well, she just stormed out of the room. What are you supposed to do? And I'm like, nothing. You forget these kids need you to make their life happen. And in 12 to 15 hours, they're going to go, Daddy, can you take me to the, party? And I'm going to go, I would love to take you to the party. Tell me why I might want to, given how you treated me a day and a half ago. They have good memories, okay? There's always going to be a payback with a teenager. And a 9-year-old, it would count too. So you don't have to make them now. Now, we could make it more difficult, which we don't have time for, of like, what if he just sits in a chair and refuses to move? We could get into that later. But to answer your question, you appealing to your authority and not necessarily appealing to his wisdom to choose on the basis of consequences every time, I'm good with that.
Okay.
Yeah, right. And let me say this. Making choices because I said so, a child obeying because of authority, a child obeying because they honor you as a parent is legitimate. That's why submission is one of our 7. Okay? I just don't want it to be the be-all and end-all of your discipline for a couple of reasons. Number one, though it is important, you have to teach it. Children are not sophisticated enough to understand an abstract concept like do it because I said so until they actually develop that ability. To do it because I said so or do it because of authority to a 5-year-old is like telling an 8-year-old, go do your homework because just think of all the people you'll help one day as a neurosurgeon. He's like, what? Okay, you need to go do your homework or you lose your Xbox. It needs to be practical because kids are concrete. So we start with the concrete, we start with the if-thens, we start with the consequences, and we teach them to value authority to where later on then we can say authority is a legitimate good thing and I want you to do this because I am the authority in your life and this is what I want you to do. But we teach them to do that. That's just not my beginning point, it's my end point. Okay? I'll wrap us up and pray. All right, what time do we start tomorrow? Boss?
Doors open at 8. Breakfast.
And I start at 8:30. Good, thank you. I thank you again. I do a lot of different conferences, and this is the meanest I ever am to an audience is Friday night for a parenting conference. I work you and twist you and push you, and you hung in there well. Tomorrow's going to be a lot easier, and I thank you. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for these people. I thank you for, I like being with them. I like who they are, your people. I pray like your benediction upon them. I pray for them. I pray for their children. I pray for their hearts. I pray for their minds. I pray as they are learning how kids work and how kids learn and how kids develop. I pray that that would get in their hearts. And more so, as we said, I pray that what would get in their hearts is that bigger piece of you being, of their being your children, of you being their God, these parents. That you would surround these parents and that you would surround their children with your Holy Spirit. That their homes would be places that reflect your character, both in terms of what is true and the right way to live, but also in terms of what is forgiven and what is it like for broken people to live together and all have the thing they have most in common is that they need you. I prayed this for them. Thank you that you are amongst us and that we can appeal to you. In Christ's name we pray.